Recording. Okay, good morning. I hope you're all doing well. Again, remember this is Hispanic Heritage Month, and in order to acknowledge and honor this month, I'm going over some American Catholics who are on their way to sainthood or who are our saints. And last time I talked about a guy, Blessed Junipero Serra, who is considered an American saint, although technically he was from Spain came through from Mexico via Spain. But this gentleman was a U.S. citizen. He was from Puerto Rico. The picture you see here is of Blessed Carlos Manuel Cecilio Rodriguez Santiago, who was born in Caguas in Puerto Rico. And yes, I checked it out on the computer just a moment ago just to refresh my own memory. In 1917, Puerto Ricans were given statutory citizenship, not constitutional citizenship, because technically Puerto Rico is not part of the United States, but it is a territory, commonwealth. But they were given statutory citizenship, meaning that they had all the full rights and privileges of an American citizen, for the most part, of an American citizen. So he is technically an American because he was born the year after, in 1918. 1918, he died in 1963, and he was a Catholic catechist and a liturgist. That's what he's known for. A catechist is someone who engages in religious instruction, like a teacher, and a liturgist is someone who is a specialist in liturgy and church worship. He is the first Puerto Rican and the first Caribbean-born layperson to be beatified. He's just on his way to sainthood. They're waiting for one more miracle to prove, quote unquote, prove that God believes he is a saint, or some spiritual evidence that he is a saint. So let's hope. But right now he is a blessed. And a layperson simply means that he's not a clergyman or a nun. He's not a member of a religious order like the Sisters of Mercy, with Gwynedd Mercy here. And he's not a clergyman like a priest or a bishop or a deacon. He's just, I guess you'd say, a regular Catholic person. So he worked as an office clerk in various towns throughout Puerto Rico. Hello. And devoted himself to the study of Catholic worship and Catholic liturgy, and that was kind of where his passion was. He eventually began publishing, I guess, a journal called Liturgy and Christian Culture, but he also spent his time teaching catechism to religious instruction to high school students, and he would give them study aids, which he would pay for out of his own pocket, which I don't think is necessarily an unusual thing for teachers to pay for supplies out of your own pocket. And he promoted a renewal of Catholic worship amongst the bishops, the clergy, and other lay people, other fellow Christians. He was diagnosed in 1963 after a surgical operation. He was diagnosed with rectal cancer, so he had a medical condition, and that's the condition he died from at the age of 44. So there he is, and I ask Blessed Carlos Rodriguez Santiago to please assist us with his prayers, assist me as I teach this course, but assist all of us in taking this course, and bless us all during Hispanic Heritage Month. Okay. Let's see. Mr. Sarabu. I got you. De la Cruz. De la Cruz. No, I got you, Ms. De la Cruz, already. Who did I get? Ms. Reyes. And Ms. Tejas Ojeda. Okay. Do you next time, sir. Let's get back. Now, back to principles of bioethics. And we ended with casuistry, yes? So let's get to that. Ethical principlism, yes. There we go, casuistry. Okay, Mr. Thomas is here. Casuistry. There you have a definition of what casuistry is. It's basically focusing on the circumstances or conditions of a situation. One could say a case-by-case study. What are the details of a case? And then you kind of decide about how to act on it. The word, it comes from the Latin word casus, from which we get our word case, which we know the word, I'm sure. But basically, if you're curious what it means in Latin, it means falling down, which is a rather odd meaning, I thought. I don't know how to connect that to casuistry, really. But it has a broader meaning of occasion or opportunity, and that was where I think we would get our connection to casuistry itself, looking for the occasions that would allow us to decide what to do ethically or morally in a situation. So casus. Casuistry had its heyday. Its popularity was greatest from the 1400s to the 1600s. I don't know if I put that on the PowerPoint. AD. 1400s to the 1600s. AD or CE, if you want to go that way. But it has been revived in the second half of the 20th century. So around the 1950s on, there was a kind of a reappraisal of casuistry, and people saw the benefits. Casuistry used to have a bad connotation. It had a bad reputation for being maybe an overly simplistic way of dealing with issues, or not taking in the holistic picture of an issue. But since its revival, people have kind of reappreciated the benefit of it. Unlike something like ethical principlism. Let's see here. Unlike something that we were looking at, like ethical principlism, casuistry does not. In fact, it attacks the traditional idea of applying universal moral norms to complex cases. Not that ethical principlism necessarily has a universal moral norm, except for kind of common morality or common sense morality, kind of a morality that everyone knows that you should do. Though it raises the question of how does everyone know that, and how do you judge that from culture to culture? Casuists do not generally appeal to a universal moral norm. This idea that a theory will give you a principle, and that will give you a rule, and then the rule that you derive from the principle will allow you to make a judgment. That's not the process that casuistry takes. Instead, for casuistry, circumstances make the case. Think of kind of like the U.S. Supreme Court or the court system in the United States, which bases its court judges base their decisions on precedents. It's kind of what's going on in casuistry. You have paradigm cases that you can look at, very similar, or I shouldn't say similar, paradigm cases that you can look at, which you can then compare with similar cases. And that should give you some information about how you should proceed in a similar case. If someone has a certain type of situation, or has a situation, and ethicists have decided you do X in that situation, if there's a similar one, it's kind of like a precedent. You can say, okay, we can do the same thing or just about the same thing in this similar case. It's kind of what's going on here. So you look at the circumstances, and those are the utmost importance for finding a solution. Though a clear solution cannot always be found, so different solutions are justified. So there's kind of a relativism here. Not every case is going to be exactly the same. So you shouldn't be surprised that sometimes the decisions or the ethical decisions might have to be different. And there's a general belief amongst casuists that using universal principles or rules, as we find in, say, ethical principlism, say virtue ethics, or even Catholic bioethics, like natural law, stuff like that, that these are really unable to solve complex cases. You have to look at the circumstances, the details of the case, and use them to guide you. It is, in a way, situational. So it's a situation ethic. And I was looking at the other day in our textbook that the author goes on at great length about situation ethics, Joseph Fletcher. So make sure you're keeping up with the textbook because it does talk about situation ethics. And I think situation ethics would be an example of a casuistic kind of ethics. Each case is different and has to be judged on its own merits. There's no overarching principle, except in the case of situation ethics would be love, however that's defined. What is the strategy the casuists use? What are they looking for in deciding what to do ethically or morally? Well, this is these three things. The first, you depict the case, then you classify it, and then you arrive at a moral judgment. I'm right there with you, Ms. Taya Soheda. What does depict the case mean? The depiction of the case. Well, basically you're laying out the empirical and the moral elements of the case. Empirical means experience. Okay, so what you're experiencing, what's going on, and what are the moral elements of the case? What are the things that you are being asked to do or that you are considering doing? What are the particulars? I mean, it's as simple as the particulars: who, what, when, why, those types of questions. Who is the person involved? What's going on? What's the situation? You also ask the question of what questions are to be determined. For example, what are the medical indications? We're dealing with bioethics, so you want to know what are the indications medically that the person is going through and that you're dealing with. And then, of course, you would ask what the patient wants. What are the indications from the patient? That would be under depicting the case. Classification is when you go to find these paradigm cases or cases that are analogous to the one you're dealing with. Okay? And I mean, this is a regular practice in medicine. I mean, you go to a hospital, you'll frequently see doctors and nurses sitting in front of a computer looking stuff up. What are they looking for? A lot of times they're looking for paradigm cases, looking for analogous situations, not moral cases necessarily, but medical cases that connect into what they're seeing from what a patient's giving them, especially if they're not sure what the patient is giving them. If the details of the illness are kind of confusing them about the diagnosis, they might look for paradigm cases now you can look it on the internet with similar symptoms, and it might lead them to a proper diagnosis. Say, oh, I see, the person has X, Y, and Z, just like this person had. Yes, this shows up too. Okay, I know what they've got. They've got Rocky Mountain fever, something like that. The same thing is going on morally with casuistry. You're looking for analogous cases that will function as a background for evaluating the ethical case that's going on then and there. It helps you identify what are the similarities in the cases, but what are the differences. And then finally, it leads to a moral judgment. Once you go through the details of the case, and maybe I should look up a casuistic case. I should prepare one or look one up just so you can get an example. Maybe I can find it in some of the old moral theology manuals because they were big on cases and, X wants to do such and such, but this is the situation and can he do it, But just to give you an idea of how this strategy works, you first lay out the information that you have about what's going on. You look for, are there parallel cases that tie into what you're doing, and then you can make a moral judgment. And with ethical principlism, casuists share the idea of that there is a common sense morality, that there are kind of basic values of a community that would then apply in making the moral judgment. If everyone agrees in the society for the most part that a physician should be open and honest and transparent with a patient, well, then truth-telling is a value, and that's something you should do in that situation. But maybe culturally it's not. Say, for example, this is mentioned in the textbook as well, going back to the textbook, that there was a study in Japan that typically Japanese doctors did not reveal all the information they had to the patient because it just wasn't deemed worthy. And that was apparently a cultural thing. So in Japan, it would be different. You would not reveal all the truth to the patient, veracity. And that would be fine, according to a casuistic point of view, because you're going according to what is the common morality or the basic value of that community. The situations are different. You can't apply a general rule of veracity as you would in ethical principlism that would apply in every country and every culture. Nevertheless, casuistry has its critics, and critics would say that you can't take the standpoint. You can't take, social, I don't want to say that, that's kind of gobbledygook I wrote down, but social practices, and you have to be aware that social practices, if you're basing it on a common morality or basic values, you should recognize that social practices may be biased or unjust. How do you know that if you're living in it and you don't recognize that you're living in a biased and unjust society? So, for example, say racial segregation, which was the norm in many parts of this country for a long, long time, until 60, 70 years ago, 60 years ago maybe. So you had hospitals that were segregated. You had hospitals that would only take white patients and hospitals that were directed towards people of color, black patients, or just people who weren't white. I mean, it didn't necessarily, if you weren't white European. So that is considered wrong, but the practice was there. And so you have an ethical case where a person is in medical distress, but the nearest hospital is a white hospital and the person's not white. Can you take them there? Should they treat and admit the patient? Well, there is a hospital for black people or for people who are non-European, but that's maybe 10 miles down the road. It's not as close. Okay? From a casuistic point of view, I guess it would be okay for the white hospital to say, no, you go 10 miles down the road where you're supposed to. The treatment is available, you just have to go. Well, what if the person's in such severe distress that they might not survive? Then you can maybe make a casuistic case that the person should be treated, but maybe it's an exceptional case. It's not the norm. See, casuistry is not making ethical judgments on the rightness or wrongness of the basic values of the community, which in this case would be racial segregation. It's just accepting them as they are and applying them to the case. Or say sexual discrimination, stuff like that. So, that is a criticism of casuistry. What about a pluralistic culture? Casuistry seems to assume that there's widespread agreement on basic values in a community, but maybe there aren't. Just off the top of my head, a very clear example would be abortion. There's a very deep divide in this country still from 1973 when Roe versus Wade was decided by the Supreme Court. But there's still a very deep divide on just that issue, which shows that it's a pluralistic culture. Not everyone agrees the same way. And that may be the same, that may be on other issues as well, not a hot button issue like abortion or something, but on other issues. So it might be a little bit simplistic for casuists to assert that and this also applies to ethical principlism, to assert that there's just some kind of common basic morality. So this is all kind of in the background here with both ethical principlism and casuistry. They're kind of trying to get around religion in a way. They're trying to get around some superstructure of values that determines what people should do and what they should not do. Because everything's relative now. values are relative to what a person believes. So you don't want to impose those on people. That's the general view. The problem is that when you have a superstructure like a religion or something like the Ten Commandments, it is imposing a value system on you. It's deontological. It's imposing a duty. You were duty bound to follow these certain principles in all circumstances. So casuistry does have difficulty providing general rules, but it does focus on individual cases. A method for decision, now that's the strategy, a method for decision making that you will come across, probably come across, if you haven't already, in medical ethics and in the medical field, is what's called the 4 topics method. It's also called, I have that on the PowerPoint, the 4-box approach. And this is a practical approach for healthcare professionals. It's practical. Casuistry is meant to be practical rather than theoretical. Turn my page here. A 4 topics approach begins with the relevant facts about a particular case, casuistry, and moves towards a resolution through a structured analysis. So if you ever have to serve on like an ethics committee, they might be using this type of approach to decide on hard cases that come up, that are brought before them by docs and nurses. Where do we find this approach? And also a modern day defense of casuistry, we find it in this book by Albert Johnson, Mark Siegler, and William Winslade. It's in its 9th edition, Clinical Ethics, a practical guide to ethical decisions in clinical medicine. So the fact that they say it's a practical guide kind of tells you that it is empirically based, it's case-based, it's casuistic. This case-based approach allows for healthcare professionals to construct the facts of a case in a structured format that will facilitate critical thinking about the ethical problem to be addressed. And so cases are analyzed under 4 topics. That's why it's called 4 topics method. And these are medical indications, patient preferences, quality of life, and then contextual features. What are each of these? Well, medical indications should be obvious. What is the problem? What is the medical issue that the person is wrestling with? How long has it happened? Is it acute? Is it onset very quickly? Is it chronic? Is it something the person has been dealing with for a long, long time? How serious is the problem to be addressed? Is it life-threatening, or is it something that's a treatable illness over a period of time? What are the treatment goals? What are we trying to do for the person? And can we be successful with what we're trying to do with the person? Think of medical futility. I mean, if your first question is the medical indications or that the procedure is medically futile, it's not going to benefit the person at all. In fact, it may do harm to the person. Well, that might already give you an answer as to where you're going to go with the situation before you get to the other 3 topics. Patient preferences answers questions like, has the patient been informed of the benefits and the risks of a procedure, medical procedure or practice? Has the person understood this information and given consent? So here we have the idea of informed consent coming into play. So casuists seem to accept that there should be some form of informed consent. It's just taken for granted, I guess. Is the patient mentally capable of making the decision? Is the patient legally competent of making the decision? Like, you're dealing with an adult and not a child. And if incapacitated, has the patient expressed prior preferences? Like, is there an advance directive of some sort about what to do with the person if, say, the person goes into respiratory arrest? Does the person want to be brought back? Something like that, if they're incapacitated. So the patient preferences are taken into consideration. You want to ask, are the patient's preferences reasonable? Quality of life. Now, this is an interesting one because this is a kind of a new development that has come about in the last several decades because life was considered a value, an absolute value, to be alive, to be living, to be in existence. But maybe not so much anymore because you may be in existence, but your quality of existence may be not so good. And so then we have issues like, euthanasia. Well, maybe not euthanasia, but assisted suicide or letting die or something like that. But quality of life is something to be addressed. What are the prospects with or without treatment for a return to normal life? Now, the question then becomes, what is a normal life? And this is where it gets situational because you'd have to define it for each and every person. A person, a person who is normally or has been normally and generally healthy is different from a person who has been almost sick his or her whole life. Or a person who's mentally disabled is obviously not going to return to the same type of life that a mentally abled person would. So you have to look at the situation. But the question still is, what is the return to whatever normal life is possible for this person? And even if the treatment succeeds, what kind of physical, mental, or social deficits might the patient experience? So what could go wrong, basically, for the person, even if the treatment succeeds? I mean, even a successful operation has its drawbacks. You can get an infection in the post-operative area, and you could die from it if the infection were severe enough, even though the operation was performed perfectly and was a success. So that's a question. And the contextual features. What does that mean? Context. Are there interests that might create conflicts of interest in the clinical treatment of the patient? So family members, okay, religious authorities. Yes, there's a situation where you have a patient who is a Jehovah's Witness who needs a blood transfusion, and for a Jehovah's Witness, they believe that is like eating blood, which is forbidden by God. And so their elders get involved when they hear that the doc wants to give them a blood transfusion against their wishes. So that's a context. That's a contextual thing. It's not making a judgment on it, whether they're right or wrong, who's right or wrong. So that's a conflictual issue. It's a contextual issue. It's affecting the clinical treatment of the patient. There might be other people who are interested in the decisions, like family members who are interested in the decisions, the clinical decisions that are going on. But a context also includes other problems of allocation of scarce health resources that might affect clinical decisions. I told you before about the situation in a third world country I lived in, Papua New Guinea, where they just simply oftentimes didn't have the money. Why they didn't have the money? Well, there are a variety of reasons, theft, corruption, the money just ran out, stuff like that, which happens even in developed countries. I've mentioned the United Kingdom with the National Health Service. They basically have a money pot, and they have so much money allocated to the budget each year. And as the budget gets less and less, tougher decisions have to be made about how you're going to allocate this resources that are now becoming scarcer and scarcer. So the context. Do we have the money? Do we have the people at our hospital with the expertise to treat this person? Are there religious issues? I mentioned Jehovah's Witnesses and blood transfusions, but it might also be a Catholic patient who is a believing Catholic and believes abortion is wrong, but the woman is pregnant, but she is diagnosed with a form of cancer that should be treated, but the treatment could harm the fetus. All right, so those are religious issues to deal with. That's part of the context. Again, it's not making a judgment on what to do about it or whether someone's right or wrong to do whatever, but that is a treatment issue or a contextual issue. And what are legal issues? All sorts of legal problems. Have you ever watched the television show Scrubs? I don't know if ever did, but they had a character who was the hospital lawyer who always wanted to kill himself. He was kind of a sad sack person. He was always down, and and he would go through the hospital begging the doctors and nurses, please don't kill a patient today, because then he has to go to court. Legal issues, all sorts of legal issues that come into play, things you can tell people and who you can tell and what you can do to people. So these are also part of the context. A lot of ethical issues that come to the courts are precisely because the hospital professionals, the healing professionals don't want to perform something because there might be they are afraid of getting sued. Or there might be a state law which prevents them from doing something. And so they can't do it. So maybe the family has to sue. While it rejects universal norms, casuistry still kind of works unconsciously from assumptions about what is morally good. And see, that's the end of my PowerPoint. Okay, go back. So even though it's kind of trying to it says it's trying to get away from having absolute values, there are some assumptions being made. For example, just informed consent. Why is it important that a patient has to be informed about benefits and risks? The doctor is the professional. The nurse is the professional. They have the training, a lot of training. They put in the hours, so they have the experience. Someone who's just come into the hospital who has no medical knowledge to speak of is now going to make the decisions about treatment, the treatment plan. They need to be told everything and have everything explained to them in detail so they can, why is that a value? Now, I would argue it's from human dignity, but a casuist wouldn't, because that's an absolute value that doesn't apply. There's no question of human dignity in the 4-box approach or in the process of making an ethical decision, but it is assumed. It's assumed that someone should know. I mean, I guess that would be a commonsensical type of thing. You should just know. You want to know what's going on with your life, and because you would want to know, and someone else would want to know, they should tell you, or tell you as much as they can. Why should it matter if a patient is mentally capable? This has not always been the view. It was accepted by the United States Supreme Court in its 1927 Buck versus Bell decision that people who were considered quote unquote mentally defective could have medical treatments given to them. Say Buck versus Bell. G. Bell. Say 1927. Could have medical treatments forced on them, not even given to them, but forced on them, like sterilizations and whatnot, against their will, because the doctors decided that it was medically advisable. They weren't necessarily doing anything bad to the person, especially if the operation was meant to correct a defect or something like that. And Buck versus Bell dealt with forced sterilizations, but you can extend the hypothesis out to other practices, like, you need appendix surgery. So they just do it. They don't tell you about it. They just, you have appendicitis, it could kill you. So the doctors and the surgeons just say, we're going to do it. They prepare you for the surgery. They bring you in, they do it. They cut you open. They don't tell you. There's no informed consent. They don't ask if you want it. They don't, it doesn't matter about your capability. So there was a point of view that, it didn't matter if the person was mentally capable of giving consent or not, especially if you deemed that they weren't. Then the doctor made the decisions. So why should it matter about capability? How do the casuists answer that? I'm not sure if they have an answer for it. And I mentioned normal life. Why is a return to normal life important? There seems to be something important about having a normal life rather than something that's abnormal. So we have kind of two values here. One is life, being alive and in existence, not being dead or out of existence. But then also normality versus abnormality, which is what health is trying to get us to. Health gets us to wholeness. Notice it doesn't get us to normalcy. We might not be fully normal after a medical treatment. Okay. You might break, if you break a leg, the leg is broken for the rest of your life, even though it heals. You can take an x-ray and a person can still look at the x-ray and see, okay, I see there was a fracture there at one point. Yeah, it healed perfectly, but there's a fracture. You might have a limp if the fracture was severe enough. Okay, so that's a question of what wholeness means. You are whole, but maybe you're not normal. So this value of a normal life, who says what's normal? How do casuists decide that? Well, they seem to just assume it. Okay, so that is casuistry. Moving on.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is the Buckbeat Bell still active?
No.
Okay.
No, I'd have to see if it was overturned, but I don't think that they could do that to you now. And I don't think it, especially because it's considered an infamous case. It's considered one of those cases that the court should probably have not decided in that such a way.
Okay. So I was just wondering because I was working with a client who had surgery recently. And then they were like, "Oh, they took my tooth out." I was like, "What?" Really?
They just went and took the tooth out?
Yeah. I guess.
Was it dental surgery?
No.
Or just regular surgery? Oh, that's interesting. So what would that be? Do you consider that a violation, or what's your ethical view of it?
I feel like if they were going to do it, they should have said something for it.
Yeah.
So.
That's a kind of a weird thing to notice, though.
I know.
Like, why are they poking around the person's mouth?
I think because maybe breathing tube. I don't really know.
Ah, okay. You think maybe they broke the tooth trying to intubate?
Maybe. This was wiggly beforehand, so I was like, maybe it just fell out.
Interesting. Yes, Ms. McLeod, yes?
When I went to have surgery, I had braces at the time, and they made me get them taken out because they said that if they put a breathing tube down, it'll take my teeth out with it. So maybe that has something to do with it.
So they had you take your braces off?
Yeah, I had to get my braces totally taken off. Because they wouldn't put a breathing tube down.
Now, I've never had braces. Is that possible, or is that a procedure where you had to go to the orthodontist and you had to physically?
Yeah, they had to physically take them off.
And then put them on after.
They said it was close enough, so I didn't have to get them put back on.
Oh.
But they were yeah, if you put the breathing tube down, you could possibly pop something out, and then it'll yeah.
That's interesting.
It'll take your teeth out. I don't know. Maybe that had something to do with it.
Maybe possible. I mean, because none of us was there, so we're just going on what someone said, what Mr. Mitchell is saying. I'm curious though. Did they offer an explanation, or did the person tell you if they offered any sort of explanation?
No. She's very go with the flow though, so I feel like she's just oh, come on. Just
Interesting.
So
I was trying to get more that way. You go in for surgery, you expect they're going to amputate, one leg and they amputate the wrong leg, something like that. Something's missing that shouldn't be missing. So we've talked about ethical principles. What kind of ethical principle might that violate? Does it violate any ethical principle? Or let's say, what ethical principle is it evidence of what the surgeon did? Do you know what kind of operation it was?
Heart surgery.
It was heart surgery? So you go in for heart surgery and you lose a tooth. I guess it's better than to lose a heart. So what do we think? Autonomy? Yes. Why?
You have a right to do with your body what you want. Or make decisions about what happens to your body.
Interesting. Yes. I would probably qualify that you don't necessarily have a right to do with your body what you want.
Mm.
Because I would think of someone who's a suicide risk. And in that case, autonomy.
Within reason.
Huh?
Within reason.
Within reason. Okay. So assuming that a person is reasonable is capable, competent, willing, yeah, the person should be able to make that decision about whether a tooth should be removed for whatever reason. We don't know the reason. Was it, as I mentioned, could have been an accidental. They broke the tooth by accident and had to remove it, or the tooth was diseased and they saw it should be removed. I don't know how. I guess teeth can be a diseased tooth can be a threat to life. I'm sure there are instances where that's possible. Get an infection. What about the attitude of the surgeon? What could that be seen as? What principle could that be invoking? Miss Springart. Casuistry.
Yeah.
In what sense?
Because they made a decision and an action based on some circumstances and conditions that maybe the tooth was bad and had to be out or something.
Okay. Well, I'm not spying on anybody. I'm just walking around. Okay, so the case that presented itself was possibly of the tooth was bad and that they had to do something. And in that situation, they would do something, normally do something. Because maybe they've done it before. Good. Good point. Yes, Coleman.
Could it be
Ooh, why paternalism?
because they're over a long ride, something that wasn't actually brought up, so they're just going take that job? We shouldn't.
We should. Why does we should come to mind? Why would they have that happen?
Like if the tooth, for example, is largely breathing down, they notice that they're like, well, we don't want that going down with the breathing tube, so let's just,
Yeah, the person could choke on it. It could get lodged somewhere. Okay. Yeah, paternalism. Which I probably should come up with a different word for it, because I know pater is father, and women are all, well, you could say maternalism as well. Paternalism. Maybe they should come up with a more generic term for it, but we'll stick with paternalism. Okay, paternalism. Yeah, the doctor knows best. In that case, though, you have, it's kind of like in the situation of therapeutic privilege, where you have an emergency situation. Then, well, first of all, doctor better know that. The nurse better know what to do. And in that case, maybe that trumps autonomy, because you can't wait for a person. If a person's having a stroke, obviously, well, I shouldn't say a stroke, but even if a person is in full mind and body, you might have to make a medical decision immediately for that. And you can't ask them for their permission. You just have to do it because you know that the result will cause damage. So paternalism. Okay, doctor knows best. What other principle could we say came into effect here? And I'll throw out a little bone to the class to maybe give you what I'm thinking about. That she wasn't told. I say she. I'm assuming it's a she. She wasn't told about what happened, why it happened, the circumstance. Just that. Oh, by the way, you might notice the tooth is missing. What could come into play there? Yes, these books.
therapeutic privilege.
How so?
Because they can withhold information if it's not necessary to tell them.
Okay.
They need to be done in order to go with the procedure.
Yeah, it might be in the judgment of the doctor or nurse that certain information might not be beneficial to the patient to know. What do you think about that, though, in this situation?
I think if it was a heart surgery, the heart surgery is more important than removing a tooth. So if the heart surgery needs to remove a tooth in order to complete the surgery, that needs to be done.
Okay. And you don't necessarily need to tell the patient the how or the why, just to do it. Okay. Because I guess you can always get another tooth. You can get a replacement. You're going to pay for it.
Who's going to pay for it?
Yeah.
Well, that comes down to the insurance companies.
Well, I know, because I'm missing a tooth. I had to have a tooth extracted because I had a big infection in it. and still waiting to get it replaced because apparently the health insurance company, I forget what they'll pay for. They'll pay for the post that the tooth goes on, but not the actual fake tooth. They'll pay for the fake tooth, but not for the post. Or something they won't pay for. So there it sits on a hillbilly. I'm missing a tooth. Okay. Interesting. Very good. Very good example. Thank you, Ms. Mitchell. I appreciate that. Let's move on. We're going to move on now to Catholic bioethics because, well, as per the description of the course, it's going to deal with, yes, bioethics in general, but also from a Judeo-Christian perspective, more a Christian perspective than a Judeo perspective, because I'm not Jewish and I wouldn't be competent to talk about a specifically Jewish ethic of bioethics. But we will look at a Catholic bioethics. Why Catholic? Because this is a Catholic university. It's not a Lutheran university. It's not a Presbyterian university or Baptist. So that's the specific Christian viewpoint that will be taken. And here's a little picture of Jesus of Nazareth from an event in his life of blessing when he blessed the children. You can see his hand out there and blessing. This is actually, I think it's a beautiful picture. I like the picture. It's actually not drawn by a Christian. It was drawn probably by a Buddhist artist who heard the story and thought that, well, this was a good man. This was someone who was someone to be imitable. And so he drew this picture. Things I love about the picture, if you look at it, is, of course, Jesus is drawn in an Asian way. He's drawn as an Asian person. And he was Asian. Israel is part of the continent of Asia. But, say a far Eastern Asian person. And has little kids around him. But I love the kid, grabbing his hair. You got one kid grabbing his beard. And I'm just thinking, yeah, that's the Jesus I love. Like the Jesus I would like to believe in. That he would let the little babies pull on his hair and grab his beard, and he's got a little smile. He's enjoying it. Okay, so what is a Catholic ethics? Well, I have to start with Jesus. Because Catholic bioethics is not based on a principle or a theory per se, but on a person. Jesus, the Lord Jesus, or Jesus of Nazareth. Catholic bioethics is the following of Jesus Christ, and so it makes it something very different. Okay? It can take ideas like ethical principlism and even casuistry and use those, but they are always used from the perspective of this person of Jesus Christ. And you don't have to agree with it or disagree with it. This is not an agreement course or a disagreement course. If you agree, that's fine. Doesn't mean you're going to get a better grade. If you disagree, it doesn't mean you get a worse grade. It just is what it is. It's where the Catholic Church is coming from when it engages bioethics. And so you're going to meet Jesus. If this is a legitimate picture of Jesus, we have no real pictures of Jesus because he's an ancient personage. But this is from the Shroud of Turin, which some people believe is an actual image of Jesus of Nazareth, miraculous image. And who knows? Carbon dating testing says no, it's medieval, but it's an interesting image nonetheless. Okay. Here's a quote from Pope St. John Paul II in a letter he wrote, an encyclical letter. An encyclical is simply a letter that's passed around amongst the bishops. Not necessarily literally, it's just sent now. Just send it by mail or by email to the bishops or publish it online, and the bishops can read it for themselves. But in the old days, an encyclical was a letter that was kind of passed around amongst the bishops of the church. And he wrote this letter called Veritatis Splendor, the splendor of truth, is what it literally means in Latin. And it was dealing with moral issues, moral and ethical issues. Okay, so it ties into the ethical element of the course. The calling to be Jesus' follower, and I'm supplying that part of it so to give you context, but the calling to be Jesus' follower is not a matter only of disposing oneself to hear a teaching and, God bless you, and obediently accepting a commandment. So it's more than just rules and following rules. More radically, it involves holding fast to the very person of Jesus, partaking of his life and his destiny, sharing in his free and loving obedience to the will of the Father. What would his free and loving obedience be? That would be ultimately his death on a cross, his execution as a criminal, which we'll talk about later. This is part of his history. It's part of his history, so you have to mention it. By responding in faith and following the one who is incarnate wisdom, there's some religious language there. So wisdom, a source of knowledge about how to live. Remember wisdom literature, Sirach, the book of Sirach. And all religions have wisdom literature, and philosophy has wisdom literature. It's basically maxims or norms about how to live the good life. So Jesus is a norm for how to the good life. So by responding in faith and following the one who is incarnate wisdom, or living how to live the good life, walking around in the flesh, the disciple of Jesus truly becomes a disciple of God. Jesus is indeed the light of the world, the light of life. He is the shepherd who leads his sheep and feeds them. He is the way, the truth, and the life. It is Jesus who leads to the Father, so much so that to see the Son, to see him, the Son, is to see the Father, and thus to imitate the Son. So here we come back to the moral element, the ethical element. To imitate him ethically, the image of the invisible God is to imitate the Father. So somehow, according to the Pope's view, an imitation of Jesus is ultimately the imitation of God. There is a linkage there between the two. So it's the following of a person, a personal authority, and that just goes with a religion, okay? Because some religions are founder religions that are based on persons, certain people, and who the person is and what they taught kind of motivates how that religion and how the believers view the world. So any rules or directives are based on the authority of Jesus, who alone leads to the one who is his Father, i.e., God. Jesus claims to be the Son of God, and we'll talk about that. Jesus claims to be the Son of God, and as God's Son, Jesus claims a certain authority. Because I am God's Son, I can teach you certain things, I can tell you to do certain things. He becomes a moral authority. And so he is the source from which all principles of Catholic bioethics and healthcare flow. That's why it's Catholic healthcare. That's why you have Catholic hospitals. That's why you have here a Catholic university with a Catholic nursing program, a Catholic radiology program. In fact, what was it? Just the other day, they're opening up did anyone go to the groundbreaking ceremony for the Innovation Center? No? No? No one went? I'm wondering, what's so innovative about it? What are they doing differently? Does anyone know why it's called the Innovation? Because they already have a nursing. Do they have a proper? They already have a proper nursing program. I forget the lady's name, Frances something.
McGuire.
I should know, huh? McGuire, excuse me. Thank you. Who told me? Who said that? Ms. Reeser. Thank you, Ms. Reeser. I appreciate that. So now we have the Francis McGuire Health Innovation Center. I don't know. Maybe they're all going to be using mannequins now so that you can work on bodies without actually working on bodies. So they have all fake blood spurting out and stuff like that. Fake pumping hearts. So he is the ultimate authority for a Catholic understanding of the human person, first and foremost, moral value and action, what are good things to do and why to do them, the meaning of life, and specifically from a healthcare perspective, the meaning and value of suffering and ultimately death, and more importantly, what comes after. Because from a Christian perspective, there is something that comes after death. Death is not the winner, even though, yeah, I mean, you're going to see a lot of death in the hospitals. Maybe you've already seen a lot of death and a lot of suffering. But there's hope. It's not a hopeless effort. Like why do I keep coming in? Because there are always patients I can't save. Well, that's true. But there is the belief that there is something beyond that for the person. We call it heaven or life with God. There's something that comes after. This is not a theology course on Jesus Christ. So it is a religious studies course, but it's not a theology course or a religious studies course on Jesus Christ. We have those here at Gwynedd Mercy. If you're interested for more detail, you can take one of those. So I can only really give a bare bones summary of who Jesus was, and the focus will be primarily, hopefully, on Jesus's impact for bioethics. You might think, what impact could he have? He was some kind of Jewish peasant who went around preaching, grasshopper. Yes, but Jesus had more to do with health and wholeness than one might think. So let's start with his name, or maybe not his name. His name, Jesus. Jesus was a very common Jewish name. It's the Latin form of a Hebrew name, Yehoshua, which means God saves or God is salvation. The Greek form is Joshua. So there's nothing necessarily unique about the name of Jesus of Nazareth. He was a Jew, so he had a Jewish name. And he is often called Jesus Christ, but Christ is not his name. It is a title that has been given to him by his followers. So be aware of that for quiz purposes. It comes from a Hebrew word, Messiah, or Mashiach in Hebrew. Comes into English as Messiah, which means someone who has been anointed. Or in medical terminology, embrocated. Yes, embrocation. To put a salve or a balm on someone's wounds, you embrocate them. So it's the same diff. Okay, it's to anoint with oil. Christos, from which we get our word Christ, comes from the Greek word chrio, which means to rub or anoint with oil. Rub or anoint with oil, which was part of ancient medical practice. Okay, they're thinking here more of the fact. Well, maybe I'll talk about it more when I get to Messiah per se. But just so you know. So Christ is a title, not his last name. I'll repeat that because I will ask it on a quiz and try to trick you, not in a bad way, but see if you're listening. So when they say Jesus Christ, it's more properly Jesus the Christ, and the fell out along the way, and it just becomes Jesus Christ. But Jesus had no last name. How do we know about Jesus? What are our sources for him as a historical figure? Well, the best source we have is still the religious source, unless we find something written by Jesus, which there's no evidence that he did do any writing, is what's called the New Testament. And this is an official collection of writings about the religious figure Jesus of Nazareth that are contained in the Bible. I say official collection because there are other writings that are not in the New Testament that also claim to be about Jesus or even written by Jesus that were probably not written by him or were not by people who knew him. But nevertheless, these are official works that have been brought together and made part of the sacred writings, the holy writings of Christianity. A testament, a testamentum is simply another word for a contract or a covenant, an agreement that's made. It's a legal document. A legal contract is a testamentum, a covenant. And the belief is that Jesus is kind of like a legal contract between humanity and God. So it's called a testamentum. And there have been other covenants with humanity because we have the Old Testament in the Bible. And the New Testament, if you look at a Bible, I should have brought my Bible with me, but anyways, if you look at a Bible, the New Testament doesn't come first, even though it's new. It comes last. It's an add-on to what were previously existing Jewish scriptures. That's why it's called new. All right. And these old, previously existing Jewish scriptures were called old, previous. Right? And they make up actually the bulk of a Bible. And so really you have these two sets of writings come together, ancient Jewish writings, the new Christian writings, which are also by the Christians were Jews as well, but Jewish Christian writings, I should say, and they come together, and that's what we have in what's called the Bible. And the Bible is more properly a Christian name for the book. Jews don't call it that. But if you want to know, you can ask me after class and I can tell you what the Jews call it. But Christians call it the Bible, which simply means the book. It's a Greek word which means book. Within the New Testament, our main historical sources for the details of Jesus' life and his ministry are these books called Gospels. And they really, when I say on the life and ministry of Jesus of Nazareth, they don't really tell us a lot about his life. They're more focused on his ministry. And so that's why you see in the definition, it's the name for a type of Christian literature containing the details of his ministry. Ministry is simply a word for service, his religious service, his career is another way we could put it. Fancy word for career. And the word gospel comes from a Greek word which means good news or good message. So they're spreading the good news about this man named Jesus. There are 4 of them, so we have 4 separate portraits of this man Jesus, which is a good thing because they don't all agree on all the details. So it allows gives historians a job to do, to kind of argue back and forth about, was Jesus really born here, or was he born there, or when did he start his ministry at this age or that age, or whatever, stuff like that. But the general portrait of Jesus given in these four books by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are generally in agreement on the basic details of who Jesus was and his teachings. So they're reliable in that sense. And before you ask, no, we don't know who any of these people are. These are just traditional names that were attached to the manuscripts. We find them on the ancient manuscripts, but there's no explanation as to why they're attached to the manuscripts. We think that these 2 guys, Matthew and John, were followers of Jesus. Okay, so that would make sense that they would be able to write from first-hand knowledge about Jesus. But there are no disciples or followers of Jesus who have the names of Mark and Luke, so we don't know who these gentlemen are. Again, Mark is a common name, and it's not even a Jewish name, nor is Luke. So who are they? We don't know. They just have their names somehow attached. As best as we can date these sources, from just internal evidence of the writings themselves, they date from around 60 AD to around 100 AD. That's probably the best guess scholars have for when these writings were written. Our earliest archaeological evidence, however, of the Gospels is this: a papyrus, a piece of ancient paper, which has writing on it in Greek from the Gospel of John, which is believed to be the latest of the Gospels written, surprisingly enough. And it dates from anywhere between 125 AD and 175 AD. So it's early, but not from the time of Jesus, but it shows that Christians were writing and copying these things. What do we know about Jesus? Or what do we think we know about Jesus? Because he is an ancient figure, and we don't have necessarily full historical details about him. From what we can gather, he lived between 6 BC and 33 AD. Notice when he was born. So it's one of those, I love history, because history, you can't make stuff up. You deal with the facts. You try to sift through the facts and find the facts. And you just have interesting little conundra that come up like this, that Jesus Christ was born before Jesus Christ was born. Right? Remember, BC means before Christ. So Jesus existed before Christ. How did that happen? Well, just from some of the, I'm not going to go into the whole details of it, but basically the calendar that the monk made in around the 500s AD was off by a few years. The calendar that we use that was based on the years of Jesus, on the birth of Jesus, that's where a calendar comes from, basically. So it was off by a few years. So, 6 years in the BC and around 33 Anno Domini, the year of the Lord. It does not mean after death, by the way. It's Latin for Anno Domini. I should write that on the board since I'm mentioning it. Okay, Anno means year in Latin, and Domini means Lord, so in the year of the Lord. He was a Jewish male, as you can probably imagine from that gendered picture of him. Okay, long hair and a beard. He's probably a male. You can't tell that he's a Jew, I don't think, just from looking at the picture. This picture is interesting of Jesus, again, as I said, because we don't have any pictures, obviously, of Jesus from the time when he lived, so it's going on people's imagination. And you'll see as we move along that people's imagination of what Jesus looked like was different. But this is from an underground graveyard, the Comadilla Catacombs. Catacomb is an underground graveyard or cemetery. Dates from the late 4th century, so that would be around the 380s or 390s AD. And it's our earliest image that we found so far of the bearded Jesus. So if you ever curious about where this image of Jesus having long hair and a beard came from, the stereotypical image that we have of Jesus of Nazareth, it derives from images like this. But this is the earliest image we found before. What did Jesus look like before? Well, we will see shortly, but not now. So they just painted on the wall of this underground cemetery a picture of Jesus of Nazareth, give him long hair and a long beard, maybe to look like a philosopher. The philosophers were known to not shave, to have beards and long hair. Who knows? So he was a Jewish male. He was born in Bethlehem of the Roman province of Judea, which was part of an empire at the time ruled by the Romans from Italy. So it's the Roman Empire. There's a map of the area and how it was divided. Judea is here, so this was a Roman province of Judea, the city of Jerusalem, and right below it by several miles is the town of Bethlehem, the city of Bethlehem, and that's supposedly where Jesus was buried. There's general agreement that Jesus was born there. Yes?
Next month, my grandma, she's very religious, she's going there, and she's seen, like, all the different sites, like the water we walked on,
Oh, cool. She's been there before?
No, it's her first time.
Oh, it's her first time?
Yeah, she's going with her church.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Oh, that's neat. When's she going?
I think in like 2 weeks.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Nice. Oh, I wish I could go with her. I was in the seminary for a couple years. I thought I'd be a priest. Obviously, that didn't happen. For a number of reasons, Miss Sarah. Shh. Anyway, but I remember the first year I had the opportunity to go to Israel, and I decided not to, and I've been kicking myself ever since. I almost went with my parish, my church. They were going to have a trip to Israel, but then COVID set in. So hopefully in the future. Yeah, that's great. So she'll get to see these things and take it. It's beautiful, but you have to take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
Because a lot of these places that they say are historical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like Jesus did this here, Jesus did it here. First of all, a lot of times the guides that you get that take you around the Holy Land, from what I hear from people who've been there and should know better, are Muslims. They're not Christians. So they don't even know the Christian story. But their job is they're making their money off of giving people tours of the Christian sites. So, oh yeah! You want to know where they got the hay from the stall? Yeah, it's right over there. You can buy some. So that's all going on. But also you have in the Middle Ages and stuff. You had a lot of history in this area. A lot of wars fought and stuff like that. And a lot of like Jerusalem that you see parts of it are historical, but a lot of it was torn down and rebuilt under the Ottoman Turks, who were Muslim rulers at the time. And this happened in the Middle Ages. So a lot of what you see there is not even from the time of Jesus, although some of it is, like parts of the temple that are there, those are certainly legitimate. And of course, archaeological digs are always going on, so they find stuff from the first century. So he's born in Bethlehem, but he grew up in the north. If you look up in the north, if you look up in Galilee, there's a town here called Nazareth. Now, how did he get from Bethlehem to Nazareth? Who knows? But there is general agreement, just as he was born in Bethlehem, there's general agreement that that's where he was from. That was his hometown. And so he is called not Jesus of Bethlehem, he's called Jesus of Nazareth, or Jesus the Nazarene. That is his name, usually his name. He had no last name. Most people in the ancient world didn't have a last name. You were known from your hometown, from your name of your father, the trade that you worked. So Jesus is known by all these. Sometimes he's called Jesus, son of Joseph. Sometimes he's called Jesus the carpenter. And that leads us to our next point. He was a tectone. He was a carpenter, apparently. He was a craftsman. And later, that's his early work. His later work is when he decides to go out and he becomes a religious figure and a religious teacher. And I will end it on there and continue next week. So have a good weekend. Goodbye to whoever's listening.